This episode, Cutting Concrete, it's not as difficult as you think. In this episode, the Handyman Pros have a discussion about cutting concrete. Larry spent some time this week cutting concrete and thought the Handyman Pros could pass on some tips and tricks for cutting concrete. Welcome to the Handyman Pros radio show. Home improvement and maintenance tips from the pros. Thanks for listening to another edition of the Handyman Pros radio show, where our goal is to help save you time, money, and aggravation on your home maintenance and repair. This edition's entitled Cutting Concrete. It's really not as difficult as you think. To help explain, I'm here with my ever-cheerful co-host and old buddy, John. John, what have you been doing this week?
Well, Larry, what have I been doing this week is that we were talking before the show that I finally got around to fixing a ladder that I had for many years that I had this thing. And it's an extension ladder. And these things that they call the flippers, everybody out there will know what they are. The little black plastic pieces on, when you raise an extension ladder and then you try to bring it back down, these things kind of kick in and let the two pieces slide, all the way down. The squirrels, as you know, I've had a lot of squirrel problems around here. Well, years ago I had a lot of squirrel problems here too, but they ate those things. But they ate those things off my ladder because they're plastic.
Yes.
And so I never did get it fixed, and I never paid it much mind until I needed that thing, and I have to repair some trim on the outside of the house. And of course, I'm like, wait a minute, my extension ladder doesn't work, and it's been that way for too many years now. So lo and behold, the internet's a great thing for finding parts. And sure enough, just got parts from Warner and fixed it. So that's what, long story short, it's back in action.
Back in action.
That's what I've been doing. But, I know I've been talking to you this week, and I think you had some concrete cutting that you did. So, I thought when we were both talking about it, maybe this is a good thing to talk to the audience about, because it's one of those things that you don't do very often, at least in our business, and it just seems to be very hard, and it's really not, right?
Yeah, that's kind of the upshot of it. So we're doing a project, myself and the Athens Handyman GA, who has been on this show before. We are doing a project. We're doing a basement remodel, and we had to cut some concrete to get at a septic line that runs in under the foundation of the home. And in that process, I've cut concrete quite a number of times in my career, if you want to call it that, or in my life. The last big major concrete cutting job that I did was for my retaining wall here at the house, and we put in retaining blocks that were concrete, and we had to cut them to trim them, to fit them in. So I've done this before. We've also cut some stone and things. John, you and I were on a job where we watched a guy cut a granite countertop, but that's exactly the same way that that I cut concrete in, or other types of stone. I've cut some countertops now because I was kind of emboldened, I guess I want to say. I think it started really when we were on that job and we watched that guy cut that countertop, and I sat there and I watched him. I'm like, really? This is all there is to it? Like, that's it?
Yeah, and he was getting a pretty penny too for
each
cut.
Yeah, for each cut, and it basically, after that, I decided I was just gonna give it a try. We'll just give it a try, and so I started it on the retaining wall, because for me, anything that's outside, an outside type project, doesn't need to be quite as down to the inch as, or let's just say there's room for error in my world on an outside project. Okay, so that doesn't mean everybody has that, but for me, you can do things with dirt and things that you can't do with wood, or you can't do with stone. So anyway, the first project I did was the retaining wall, and then I did, as you know, I did my patio with pavers, and we used concrete pavers. So same thing, I had to trim up the concrete pavers to make them actually fit in and make them look right. So I sort of learned a little bit, and then we cut this foundation this week. And so there's just a couple of tips and tricks, and I think part of it is just don't be overly intimidated by it. That's the first thing. And then I wanted to just talk about a bunch of actual real tips and tricks of, if you're going to cut concrete, what do you need to do, right, John? So I wanted to ask you, have you ever cut concrete?
I have. And, like I said, I just haven't done – I don't do it very regularly for really anything. Personally, I kind of stay away from a lot of that stuff, but when you have to, you have to.
Right.
And I think I rented a great big cutter one time. But that was a while ago. I think I cut a curb.
Yeah, yeah, right. So you probably
just by the driveway.
Yeah, you probably rented a gas powered concrete cutter with and got out there and was really doing it like they do it. So now
it was quite the mess. It was kind of when you're using a tool like that, but it's the only way that you can get these things, get the job done.
Yeah,
so,
right.
And a lot of times there's going to be you're going to have to cut concrete. Like a lot of people do, a basement renovation or a remodel or something that you want to put another line in, or a drain line like you guys are doing.
Yep.
There is no other choice. You have to get underneath there and find it.
Yeah,
do
and
it.
Cut it. And even more, more for other things, just like I said, around the yard, or if you're cutting brick, for example. So one of the things that's kind of common amongst all these things, basically, is anything that's a stone type product. It can be stone, it can be concrete, it could be brick, it could be anything. They all use basically the same tools. So that's kind of one of the things that when we talk about this, you have to think about this and apply this into all of the different types of hard surfaces, basically, that you're going to want to cut. So I thought I broke this down into a couple of things. We're going to talk a little bit about safety, about planning the cut itself, or how many cuts you're doing, tools and equipment, and a couple of other factors that come into this when you do this thing. We're going to have some do's and some don'ts and some stuff like that. So first thing we always want to talk about is safety. So by the way, we are not professionals at this, but we've done enough of this just to be dangerous. But definitely, I can tell you from personal experience, you need protective eyewear. Absolutely, you have to have your eyes protected. Hearing protection is really highly advised, because these saws are pretty noisy. I was using an electric one, but even then, it's actually the sound of the blade cutting. It's a pretty high pitched noise, and if you're doing it in any kind of a confined area, pretty good idea to have some hearing protection on. Absolutely, positively, you have to have at least an N95 mask on. And I'm not talking about a COVID mask. I'm talking about a real face-covering mask, because when you cut this concrete, even if you use water, there's a huge amount of dust, and the dust is not good for you. It's ultra fine. I mean, basically, stick your head in a bag of concrete and start breathing, and that's what you're doing. So you have to have at least an N95 mask, and get a one that fits over your mouth and nose. This is not, again, like COVID. Don't wear it down with your nose down. It's got to cover the whole thing.
Yeah, or a respirator.
Yeah, you don't necessarily need a respirator, but if you have one, and you want to wear it, it's as good an option as the N95, but N95 at a minimum. And then it's generally not a bad idea to wear some kind of a Tyvek suit. I guess that depends on how much cutting you're actually going to do in the environment that you're doing it. But I didn't wear one this weekend. I'll be shaking concrete dust out of my shoes for about the next 2 years. I would wear boots if I were to do it again, and I would actually probably wrap up tape around a Tyvek suit, because the dust is
awful.
It's pretty bad. Yeah, it's pretty bad. So that's kind of a minimum but definitely have to have eyewear. Definitely have to have at least an N95 mask. Hearing protection is highly, highly recommended, because it is pretty noisy, and a protective suit might not be a bad idea. It's not unnecessary, but this dust is really pervasive. I don't know how else to put it.
and if you're and I know you can buy some filters for your vacuum, but that concrete dust will ruin a vacuum.
It will. You definitely need at least a drywall filter or a HEPA filter if you're going to use your vacuum.
And it'll clog up quick, though.
And it clogs up quick.
There's just no good remedy to cleaning that stuff up, and just it's containment.
It's mostly you want to contain it is the key, right? So part of that is so that's part of that planning of the cut, right? So if you know you're going to cut, you basically want to wall off whatever areas you're doing. So either with plastic and tape, or just depends on the particulars of the area. But if you're outside, it's generally not a problem. But even outside, it will leave this very fine trail of whichever way the wind's blowing. You'll actually see it, and until it rains, it'll leave this kind of grayish dust trail. Now, a lot of this is alleviated. We'll get into this in a little bit, but you can do dry cuts versus wet cuts. I'm talking about doing dry cutting, but you can cut with if you have a saw that has an attachment for water. That'll take a lot of the dust down, but it's still out there. We were running a whole house fan this weekend, and we were cutting, actually, because we were inside, we were cutting with an electric saw, so we didn't have the water capacity. And I've got to tell you, we had that whole house fan, and I mean, there was a plume of dust going out into the woods. It was pretty impressive, actually.
Yeah.
So anyway, the idea of when you have to plan to cut, one of the other things about when you cut stone, it's really tough to cut corners, okay? So you have to plan in straight lines, and you really have to just kind of think about it, because it's not like you have the ability to do a lot of caulking or anything like that where you can kind of fix it. So you want to make sure that, depending on what you're doing, like in our case of doing this foundation, we got it in good straight lines, but we're going to backfill it with concrete. So it's really not that big a deal. Once we get the plumbing in, we'll backfill over with concrete and then smooth it all out, and it'll be fine. But if you're cutting a paver or something like that, really make sure you've got the right size. There's no, I mean, if measure twice, cut once. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Measure twice, cut once, because there's no cutting twice. You can make it smaller, but you won't make it bigger, for sure. And there's nothing to really caulk unless you're going to fill it with, I don't know, you can fill it with some things, but try to get precise with it. Tools and equipment. We talked about this for a little bit, but definitely all the safety gear that we talked about earlier. John, what have you cut? So you said you cut. Was yours a gas-powered saw that you rented?
Yeah, I rented one, right? Okay. So you can rent these big things. They're gas-powered, and that's if you're going to cut anything like across your driveway or something like that, it's nice to have something like that.
Yeah,
I have also used just like an angle grinder with a cutter on it.
Right. So like a 4-inch grinder,
and I will tell
right?
you that I know we're talking about concrete right now, but if anybody out there, if you guys are putting in pavers and things like that, I mean, this all applies to that too.
Same, pavers, brick.
All of that, because when you really put in pavers and you try to go around an area, you're going to have to get creative and cut little pieces like pie-shaped pieces and things to make the turns and things like that. And that's how they do it, and that's how you will be doing it if you're going to do pavers yourself.
Right.
To use a small angle grinder, but it goes right through it though.
It goes right through it. It works really, really well. The key is to have the right blade, and so So I'll give you my experience. So I've used a 4-inch grinder, right, which is the small angle grinder like John's talking about. I've used a 7.5-inch circular saw, which, believe it or not, works just fine with the right blade. Yep. And then I actually bought for this job because I have another big retaining wall project coming up. So I said to myself, I'm going to buy myself a saw. So I actually bought an electric 12-inch saw. But all of these things have the same common feature for a blade. I use the diamond tip blades. Now they do make an abrasive blade made out of it's not diamonds, but it's just like what do they call it, John? It's just an abrasive blade. It's kind of like a grinding blade. They just don't last as long, and they don't make as fine a cuts as the diamond blade. So invest in a good blade, and you're going to pay probably from $15 for a 4-inch blade and up, maybe $15 to $20 for a good 4-inch blade. I think my circular saw blade was around $35, and then these 12-inch blades are running in the $60+ range, just depending on brand and stuff like that. But these are called diamond blades, and they have cooling fins in them, and you'll see them if you go into the the tool area. You'll find these blades, and they're designed to cut. They'll cut tile, they'll cut ceramic tile, they'll cut brick, they'll cut basically anything that's hard. A lot of guys use these for or guys and gals, I should say, use them for tile. So if you're doing tile, you can cut with like a 4-inch grinder. You can cut tile really, really easily. But use the diamond ones. I've just found they just work really better. They last a tremendous amount longer. I mean, they really last really a long time.
Yeah, you pretty much get what you pay for in a cutting blade.
Yep. And of course we could say that for almost all of our cutting blades, really, that you are going to get, the better quality blades cost more, but they last just a tremendous amount longer. So you're going to need that. There was something else I was just thinking about. when it came to cutting, you know, you need a good pencil to mark things, either a pencil or a marker or a chalk thing, whatever.
Yeah, because it gets messy real quick.
Yeah, and it's tough to see actually.
It's
so
tough to see.
Yeah, the dust gets over it, so you want a good solid line when you're trying to cut a line. I actually on this 12-inch blade used a 2x6, and we laid the blade right up next to the 2x6 and used that as a guide. It worked really, really well. But you need a big blade to do that. So
yeah, that's a good tip right there to use a guide like that.
Yeah, it really was very helpful. We had a long run of probably it was probably 20 feet, it's 15 to 20 feet, I guess.
Yeah.
And so when we wanted to have a good straight line, because we're going to put plumbing in it, so it needs to be, you know, we're putting PVC plumbing in it, so it's in 10-foot lengths and it needs to be straight. So we use that just as a guide. And I would suggest you could do the same thing really with anything. I wouldn't use anything metal. I'd use wood, because the diamond blade really won't cut it. It almost like polishes the wood if you touch it. It'll cut it. Don't get me wrong. It'll cut it, but it's not like a wood blade that'll kind of like you know, scuff it, like I guess I'm trying to say. It doesn't do that. It almost polishes the edge of the wood. Because I looked at the boards when we got done, I'm like, wow, these are really good, you know. So that's the key, is make sure you have that good blade to start your cuts. Again, we were talking a little bit about dust control. If you're cutting inside, wall off wherever you're cutting. You know, put plastic up, put something up. Do it that way.
Yeah, because if you've never cut concrete, folks, if you're out there, you know, thinking about doing this, it's just like going crazy on wallboard. You know,
really
sanding
similar.
wallboard.
Really
similar. It's gonna go everywhere. It's gonna go everywhere. So if you're really serious about this, you know, get some plastic. Invest in one of these things that they call a zip wall that you can put up around this whole cut. But you know, really, Larry, and I know that you agree. It's more of a containment strategy than it is, you know, trying to suck that stuff up while you're doing it, because it's really rough
tough
on a vacuum. Vacuums get clogged up fast, and it can be a mess. So
it can be a mess. There is a technique where you use water, and so you can put water in on the blade, much like a tile saw does, where it puts water on the blade. That controls the dust to a degree. It's not foolproof. Then it makes a slurry. And
you're kind of screwed either way. You know?
I personally think the slurry's harder to clean up than the dust.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, right.
You know, there's positives and negatives. You know, again, depending on where you're cutting, can determine, you know, which type of that you do. So it's just kind of one of those things. We do, you know, we did some research, obviously, and we got some do's and some don'ts. You know, wear protective clearing is definitely one. Thoroughly inspect your blades before you start, and then check them pretty much as you go, because these blades spin. They're pretty fast, and they work as a grinding type cut. It's not like a saw that actually it takes pieces off, but it's very, very small. So you want to make sure that the blades are in good shape. Keep the blade guards on, folks. I'm going to tell you to do that with any of your saws. Don't take the blade guards off. That's just really not the brightest thing in the whole wide world. If you're using a water saw, you want to make sure the water actually flows, because that blade the water will also cool the blade. And those blades are a little bit different than the dry cut blades. And it says on the blades what kind it is, so you'll know when if you buy the blade or you rent the blade, they'll tell you, you know, this is water only or this is water and dry. Either way. One of the other things to do that's kind of this is an actual tip. So when you're actually doing the cutting, what you don't want to do is you don't really you don't make a deep cut first. You move the saw back and forth, and you cut in kind of like segments, and you take it down just very, very slowly, but you move it back and forth. I'm moving my arm back and forth because it literally works better that way. And like when we were originally, because of the vision was a problem of seeing the actual lines, we scored the line first, just down, I don't know, maybe, you know, a 1/10 of an inch or a 1/16 of an inch, just so we could see the line. But definitely you don't drop the saw on and expect it to cut down deep through.
Yeah, it's not like cutting wood.
Yeah, it's not like cutting wood. It's not like a chop saw. You actually have to move the saw back and forth and just take it down. It's a relatively slow process. Again, it's not wood. It takes a while to do these cuts. And so to give you an idea, this weekend we did about I think we did about 30 to 35 feet. It took us from 8 o'clock in the morning till 2 in the afternoon to do.
And how thick was the concrete?
Well, we were cutting 4 inches thick.
Okay.
So it took us quite a while. Now, I would tell you when I was cutting the pavers I were using were 6 inches thick, and I was using my circular saw, and I did have to cut them on both sides. But it would take me about, it would take probably 15 minutes to cut a paver. Whereas if it was wood, it'd be 15 seconds, zing, But you just go back and forth and make sure that it's running good. One of the things too is just when you're doing dry cutting, take the blade up every once in a while. Just let it run free. It'll cool it off. The airflow over it'll cool it off, and that's always a good thing to do. You definitely want to, obviously be very, very careful with that saw blade. Don't let it get anywhere near your body. Don't touch it. Be on good footing and things like that, right? Obviously, this makes sense. You would do this with any saw. But, John, don't we always see pictures of people doing stupid things? Like we've posted some on our Facebook page, like people standing on doors painting.
I like to post things that are pretty stupid on the page.
I mean, it's like they're like, really, dude? Like,
I think that brings clarity to a lot of things.
It certainly helps. I mean, common sense, right? Yeah, well, whatever. And again, check the blades every once in a while. If like anything, if you're uncomfortable doing this, then don't. Right? Don't do it. You can go and watch guys do it, and then you can watch somebody do it. Almost every construction site at one time or another has somebody cutting concrete on it. You can take a look and watch them and see if it's good. Just see if it's good or not, and stuff like that.
And you can rent, and so for the people out there who don't do this all the time, and would probably do it a lot more than a lot of these other folks listening. But if you do have to do it, you can go rent this kind of stuff too, right?
Definitely, Larry? Yeah, you definitely. Can
now
rent
I rented a big one because it was outside,
right?
But for smaller stuff, you can go rent this stuff, so you don't have to buy, And there's no other way of doing it. Okay?
No, there really is no other way.
If you have to do it, and it requires the and you want to do it yourself, go rent the stuff. Really.
Yeah. And it is one of those things. So there are big, like this 12-inch saw, you can rent that. So this 12-inch electric saw. Now I chose to buy it because it just got down to a money thing. I could own it for basically for the amount of time that I'm actually going to need it in the future. I might as well buy the thing. But if you just got one little project, go rent one. They make both gas powered ones and electric ones. I will say, if you use an electric one, this electric one that I have, we popped the 15 amp dedicated breaker a couple of times, so it's pretty much a power pig. You need a good, super thick extension cord with it. Put it on a dedicated line. We fortunately had a dedicated refrigerator line. It wasn't on a 20 amp breaker yet. It's going to be on a 20 amp breaker, but we had a 15 amp breaker, and we popped it a couple of times. So I think Larry was running the saw a little deep, if you want to know the truth.
Yeah, right.
And again, let it run. Let the saw blade do its thing, right? Let the saw blade do its thing. Down pressure, it does not make it cut faster. It just doesn't. All it does is heat up the saw and heat up the blade. So, John, do you have any questions on this? I mean, is there anything I missed here? Or we?
No, I think you did a great. I think you covered it. That's been my experience on it. I'm not the concrete guy. I will tell you that I've never cut concrete through, with rebar in it or anything like that. Any big project like that. I've done some light cutting of concrete. So
yeah, we were lucky. There was no rebar in this.
I'm not going to profess that I'm the expert on concrete cutting at any level.
Yeah.
But certainly I wouldn't be opposed to doing it.
Just on your rebar comment, I just want to make a comment. So these diamond tip blades will cut rebar. You'll know it because it'll start to spark, but but it will cut through that rebar just like it cuts through the concrete. It's not so much an issue. We were very fortunate in this cut this week that they had put Well, I guess it's fortunate. It's kind of a catch-22. They had used fiber concrete, so we did a show on concrete, but folks, sometimes in concrete they actually put little fiberglass strands in this concrete, and it makes it super strong. And they had used fiber. The downside was it actually increased the dust. So there was along with having concrete dust, we had fiber dust in there too. So it's a different way of reinforcing the concrete. But anyway, yeah. All right. So don't be afraid, right, John? Is that the basic upshot?
Yeah, I mean, I think anybody can take this on, and you're gonna have to do something like this. If I want to put a shower in my basement, I'm going to have to cut through the concrete.
Yep.
I'm going to have to do it.
Are we doing that? Are we doing your basement?
Yeah, sure, Larry. You can come on over. I was waiting for you so I can sit there and drink beer and watch you put the floor in.
See, you see the kind of work I get. Do you see this, folks? You see.
But I'm not opposed to doing that at all. And so for anybody out there that has these projects coming up, you're going to be faced, at some point in time, to do that. Or if you're going to put some stone in, some either what I mentioned before was pavers. You can do, stone trim outside for hardscaping and things like that. You're going to have to, cut this stuff.
Yep.
And so what we want to just bring today is that there's some of the tools, the safety. It's not that hard, and I know a lot of people don't want to do it, but I think anybody can accomplish that.
And I concur wholeheartedly. John?
Yeah?
The spaceship has landed. Do we look at it, or do we take it apart?
Well, yeah, so when it landed, Larry, he came out and he said, I want to buy one of those diamond blades. And I said, well, what kind of currency do you have? And you know what he told me?
No, I'm waiting.
You know what their currency is? Starbucks.
Ba-dum-bump.
We're out.
Folks, with that, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns about bad jokes, please send us an email. questions@handymanprosradioshow.com. Go to our website. You can leave us a message. That's at handymanprosradioshow.com, obviously. You can join our Facebook group. We're at Handyman Pros. We'd really like some comments and some feedback, too, for that on our Facebook group. So we've been posting some stuff up, John and I. We found some really unique things, like we were talking earlier about people standing on doors doing painting and all kinds of John, did you see the outlet cover that somebody cut in half to put in the corner? That was a beauty.
Yeah,
it's all out there. It's a beauty. Or folks, you can follow us on Twitter. We're at Handyman Radio. We appreciate it, and we will see you next week on the Handyman Pros Radio Show. Ladies and gentlemen, if you've enjoyed this podcast and have derived some value from it, here's 4 things you can do. 1, tell your friends about this podcast. 2, hit subscribe on your podcast player. While you're there, leave us a review. 3, subscribe to our newsletter by going to handymanprosradioshow.com and click on the subscribe button. We'll inform you of upcoming events, shows, and give you actionable tips for maintaining your home and property. And 4, send us an email with your questions to questions@handymanprosradioshow.com. That's handymanprosradioshow.com. That's our show for this week. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week on the Handyman Pros Radio Show.